Hello everyone, just a quick note before we get to the episode. This is part 2 of our planned multi-part Silmarillion reread series. While you can listen to this episode without knowledge of prior events, it is recommended that you listen to part 1 of this series, which was Vassals of Kingsgrave episode number 147. Also, the Silmarillion can be a bit of an info dump and overwhelming at times, and some readers are scared away by all of the elven family trees and similar names, which begins in this episode. But have no fear, as long as you keep in mind that Melkor or Morgoth is the evil god and main enemy, and that the elven king Fenway and his descendants are the main good guys, you've got the basic plot of the Silmarillion.
They develop a very precise speech because they're basically grammar Nazis, like all Stanners.
I didn't say it. The German guy said Nazi.
No, sorry. It's
Sorry.
I don't know. We're very. I mean, I'm not conscious about it.
I'm
not
sorry.
conscious about
I had
it.
to mention it though. You didn't say Nazi. Welcome everyone to Vassals of Kingsgrave. This is going to be our second discussion of the Silmarillion series we have going. We'll be discussing today the first 6 chapters of the Quenta Silmarillion, which is the beginning of days through of Feanor and the unchaining of Melkor. We're joined today by 5 other vassals, and we have a first-time podcaster with us, Beric. So if Beric, you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll just go around in alphabetical order.
I'm Matthieu. I'm Beric on the forums. I've been asked many times to come on the VOK before, but until now I had no idea how. So I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I'm actually from Belgium, so it's a different time over here than it is in the US. So yeah, I should probably be in bed, but yeah, it's fine.
Well, thank you for making it. I know it's a work sometimes. But did you want to say a little bit of how you got into Tolkien, what else you've read by him, and what your...
Oh, I actually got into Tolkien in 2002, actually, when I moved to Belgium, because that was when I was watching the movies first. I first watched the first one, then I wanted to read the books, and I read the Lord of the Rings before I watched all the other films, and then actually I reread The Hobbit because I read it as a young child, but I had no idea that it was related in any way to the same story. Actually, I was just I didn't remember the author or anything, so I reread it afterwards. And then I got into the Silmarillion, and I read it once, and I listened to the audiobook ever since because it's just so much easier.
Did you read it in German originally, or was it in English?
Oh yeah, I read all the books in German actually. I have a French edition somewhere of the first Lord of the Rings book, but yeah, generally I read them in German. But the names are basically the same. It's no, there are no translation literally of the names. They just use the same ones.
Right.
I have The Hobbit in English as well, so I'm probably gonna try to read it in English as well. But until now I haven't been able to do that. But yeah.
You're a better man than I.
all right, so everyone else wants to introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm Alix. I Wendiel on the forums.
This is Shane, East Texas Direwolf on the forums.
This is Brett, White Raven on the forums.
This is Matt, Verley on the forums.
And this is Greg, Claudius the Fool on the forums. So basically the format we're going to do is to do a brief, or kind of as brief as possible, chapter recap, and then get into the discussion proper. So
basically, we're going to read this book for everybody.
Yeah, it's kind of strange because some of the chapters are only 2 or 3 pages, but literally there's something on every single line, so we'll try not to be too repetitive, but, what would a good review be without being a little repetitive? So I believe, Brett, you're going to do the honors for the chapter 1?
I'm going to try my best.
All right.
All right, my chapter was of the beginning of days. So it begins with the first war before Arda was fully shaped and before anything grew or walked upon the earth, and Melkor was just destroying everything that the Valar ever made until Tulkas the Strong heard about the war going on in the Little Kingdom, and he came to aid the Valar. And his wrath and laughter scared the pants off poor Melkor, and Melkor fled from Arda, creating a long peace. But Melkor was not finished, and he brooded in the outer darkness, becoming darker, and planned his revenge. So during the peace, the Valar calmed the planet and readied it for life, and Yavanna planted seeds, and Ale made 2 mighty lamps that Varda filled with light, and Manwë hallowed them. They were set on pillars in the far north and the far south of Middle-earth. They have names, but they don't matter because they're going to get destroyed next paragraph. Spoiler, sorry about that. So all of Middle-earth was bathed in the light, and everything began growing, and the color green was invented. And the Valar dwelt in the middle where the two lamps blended together to make like a light from both of them, and they lived on an island in the middle of a great lake named Almaren. Now, does anybody think that a great lake is pretty unimpressive for a name? I'm thinking Christopher Tolkien put that in.
That's what it needs to say. Actually, it's just it's really accurate. Apparently.
Yeah. Well, it's capital G, capital L, Great Lake.
Sounds like a good Hobbit name, but the elves aren't typically very Hobbish.
Right.
Habishan. I think it's Habishan, Shane.
And my theory is that the elves actually they smoked lots of hobbit weed between the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings actually. So probably at some point they just said, let's write Great Lake.
Does anybody really remember what it was called anyway? No, because it was around before we were born.
Yeah, we weren't even there for any of this shit yet.
That was the Valar's bad. Like, yeah, we forgot to name that. Sorry about that. All right. So after the Valar did all this work, they decided to rest and feast to their achievements. And Melkor had spies among the Maiar, and he knew the plan of rest and celebration. He called all his converted spirits to him and planned his return to Arda to reign as king over all. During the celebration, Tulkas married Nessa, the sister of Orome, who must have been a panther in the sack because she wore Tulkas out and he fell asleep. Melkor decided this was his moment. He descended upon Middle-earth in the far north unseen and started building his vast fortress named Autumno in the mountains. The Valar, they were pretty clueless to his return because they weren't paying any attention. They were just having their little party. And then all the green things up north started dying and getting sick, and evil came, and the fly was born. So, that's evil.
It was like Ebola in Middle-earth.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
And that's when the Valar knew that Melkor had returned because flies were around all of a sudden. So they started searching for his underground lair. Before the Valar were prepared, Melkor struck and destroyed the lamps, causing chaos and destruction, and even destroyed Almaren, marring Arda so that the first designs of the Valar could never be restored. After destroying the lamps, Melkor tucked tail and ran for Autumno, fearing as he was pursued by Manwë and Tulkas. He arrived at Autumno and hunkered down. The Valar chose not to do battle, for they had to calm the earth. So they tried to save as much of the earth as they could. They decided war would be ill-advised until they knew where the children of Iluvatar would come from. They did not want to risk them being caught in the crossfire. So right there, I just want to stop. Does anybody want to talk about the Valar deciding not to do anything about Melkor?
Well, it has sort of a World War II vibe to it because, they don't necessarily know how strong he is necessarily, I think. They don't know how much destruction that would cause. So I guess that what the main idea is that they actually make a moral choice, but at the same time, we can see that this might present some problems because he goes unchecked and he can always say, well, screw you, you're not doing anything, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so they summarize a lot of stuff before we get to the Quenta Silmarillion proper. So is this the first time Melkor kind of starts messing up Middle-earth?
Yeah, well, this is the second time, because the first time it was when Tulkas first came and scared him away, and then he came back down after they had their little party. So it's actually the second time.
Well, yeah, the first time it was when they had the ongoing battle where Melkor raised lands, or, Manwë raised lands and Melkor destroyed them, and that went back and forth for a while, which I think was before Tulkas came, right? That was what was said in, the Valaquenta. But
Yeah,
because some of the narration, he jumps around where he'll say stuff in one chapter that actually hasn't happened yet.
But I guess the only thing that we could say is that he probably saw what a nice party they were having, and he was saying, damn it, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Right, like this kind of thing where he's sort of like he can't control himself, to be honest. I guess that's sort of what he is now. He's kind of just bent on destruction. If evil exists in the created world, then that means that it is also part of Iluvatar, right? So the only question is how much free will does Melkor actually have in causing destruction? Because if it's part of the plan that he eventually has to be a tool for evil. To work its ways, then probably that means that it was sort of foreseen as well, even though he might think it comes from outside of the creation. So when he sort of disrupted the music, I think that might actually be already part of the big picture. So I don't know exactly how much free will there exists in Iluvatar's creation.
I mean, he created him to be bad.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the idea, because if everything is Iluvatar, then everything that Malcolm seems to think he brought into it is also part of Iluvatar, probably, which means that Iluvatar has a bit of a douchey side as well. But that's probably just as well.
The music of I've always thought of that the music was the Valar were shown the music of Iluvatar, which was Iluvatar's thought, and then they each wove their own theme into it. So Melkor definitely chose to do what he did, by attacking and deciding to be destructive, and that was his. That necessarily didn't come from Iluvatar, even though it was all one song, but it was like he was choosing what to do. But there is the whole question of free will, and to what level do they actually have free will? Is it all preordained? And if so, what's the point of trying to change it?
With Almoren destroyed, the Valar had no place in Middle-earth to live, so they moved to the westernmost parts of Arda, to the borders of the world. They fortified this new dwelling and raised a great mountain range between their land and Middle-earth, called the Pelori Mountains, the highest mountains on Earth. On the highest point of the highest mountain, Manwë set his throne. From there, with Varda, they could see and hear almost everything to the easternmost regions of Arda. The land on their side of the mountains was named Valinor. The Valar stored up much light there and created a land greater than Middle-earth, even in the spring before Melkor's return. Even the very stones and waters were hallowed, and there was no stain or corruption to be found. After they finished Valinor and the plain beyond the mountains, they built their city of Valimar. Before its western gate there was a green mound Yavanna hallowed, and sang a song of great power, in which she put all of her thoughts into things that grow. Nienna thought in silence and watered the land with her tears. And as the Valar sat in silence upon their thrones of council, and all right, I'm going to try to say this, Mahanaxar? Anybody? The Ring of Doom?
Go for it.
All
right.
It's one of my favorite words that he created.
Yeah.
It looks awesome. It's just hard to say.
My favorite word is Helcaraxe, which is
Helcaraxe? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the icy.
Those X's get us.
Yeah, it's like it's I don't know. It's just the X in it. Yeah.
I feel like Aule made this word because he loves X's. Like, he wrote the Dwarven language, so he must have been the one. All right, so anyway. So the Valar sat in silence upon their thrones in council, and the two trees began to grow, the only sound being Yavanna's chanting and the falling of Nienna's tears. They were the trees of Valinor, and everything created by Yavanna they had the most renown. The first tree to flower was Telperion. He had leaves of dark green that beneath were as shiny as silver, and from his flowers there was a dew of silver light ever falling. The second was Laurelin, and she had leaves of young green with the edges of glittering gold. Flowers upon her branches were yellow flame, and formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the earth. And from the blossom came forth a warmth and a great light. In 7 hours each tree waxed to full and waned again to naught, and each awoke once more to life an hour before the other had ceased to shine, giving 1 hour of light from both. The birth of the trees was the beginning of the counting of time, and Varda collected light and water from them and stored them in great vats, so saving up for the future there. So back on Middle-earth, the hour appointed by Iluvatar for the coming of the elves was coming closer. But Middle-earth laid in twilight beneath the ancient stars that Varda created long ago, and the darkness of Melkor reigned supreme. He walked abroad in many shapes of power and fear, and wielded cold and fire from the tops of the mountains to the deepest places of earth. He brought forth cruelty, violence, and death. At this time, few of the Valar came to Middle-earth. Alais sat and created his bullshit in his mansions. Manwë looked out over the lands and was brought news of the land by spirits in the forms of hawks and eagles. But even Manwë could not see into the impenetrable dark of Melkor's shadows. Yavanna would venture out and repair the works of her labors in Middle-earth, and often urged the Valar to war with Melkor before the firstborn came. Orome often hunted in the lands of Middle-earth, pursuing to death the monsters and fell creatures of Melkor, riding upon Nahar, his silver steed with golden hooves. He would sound the great horn Valarama, and evil fled away. Even Melkor quailed in Autumno, fearing the wrath to come. Ulmo alone never lived in Valinor and rarely went there. It was because of him that the waters of Middle-earth kept flowing and life kept going. He alone has never forsaken Middle-earth and never will. And that's pretty much it, except for the stuff about men being most like Melkor, and they give Manwë a headache.
I always have a problem with a fiction when it comes to free will, because usually it's seen as something evil. It's like people saying you don't have any free choice to help others. Like it's always cast a negative light. So I don't know exactly if that's sort of like the influence of the religious subtext by Tolkien seeping in. For example, he was a devout Catholic, right? So I think
Yes,
maybe the idea that sort of man is most like Melkor and etc. is sort of the idea of the Garden of Eden. Don't you eat that apple, right? It's like
Yeah.
so I guess this is sort of an analogy, even though he hates analogies.
In comparison to elves, like Melkor corrupted a lot of men, so
Yeah,
like they
corrupted a
chose
lot
to
of both.
follow him. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
he stole elves and he convinced men to follow him.
Right.
So
He didn't have
it was
to
a bit more
corrupt men to follow him. He
democratic.
just convinced him.
The fact that the Valar originally thought that Middle Earth was going to be their hangout, I find that odd because everything that comes later, it's all like they forsake Middle Earth. Middle Earth is this other place, but originally they actually wanted they made that their dwelling, and they only went to Ammon in the end because they needed defense basically from Melkor, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Which just shows how powerful he actually is, right? Because he can hold his own against all of them, but at the same time, it's a bit inconsistent as well. Because if Tulkas sort of sends him fleeing, then basically they just need to trot him out every time. Send him over like Tulkas. Beat him up a couple of times. Just what are you doing, knucklehead?
But I don't feel like Melkor would ever go toe to toe with anybody. He's more of a like, haha, I destroyed what you built, and then he runs away. He very rarely stands up to someone.
Does anyone know what like hallowed is? Because they hollow a lot of stuff, and Melkor still fucks it up.
I think hallowing. I actually looked at it. It's the art of making something holy, to consecrate something, basically. Because there's a lot of fraud.
Right. I get
and
that, but
hallowing.
like obviously it doesn't work.
Well, it kind of does.
Well, it's still
Melkor's more powerful.
It burns him to walk on it and stuff.
Yeah, but that's like an annoyance. It's not
Yeah.
stopping him.
It's like the flies.
Yeah.
It's their answer to flies.
Yeah, he's not a vampire, so it's not like you just sprinkle holy water on it and it makes everything right?
We get the two trees, which are the thread that everything is kind of built around, is the two trees of Valinor. And
The start of time.
Exactly, it's the beginning of time, and throughout a lot of Tolkien's writings, trees and nature are very important and almost reverential. He was obsessed with trees, and they were the epitome of goodness and what's good in life. So it makes sense that he would have these two trees that are almost angelic and holy beings in and of themselves. And it's interesting that all the trees that come later, none of them give off light. It's almost the light of Varda is the driving force behind them, and that's what eventually goes into the Silmarils also. These aren't just trees, they're like crazy holy trees that shine light also. Question about when he talks about giving spirits in the shape of hawks and eagles, did you guys think that these are like Maiar coming to be an eagle or a hawk, or are these just, he has control over the hawks? Because if the great eagles are actually spirits, then that means like the eagles that show up later are actually like on par with Sauron and those guys.
But these are, they're different. The Mayas are not all the same power and rank, right? It's at the same time. I feel like this is actually a very good connection to the Eagles in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, because at least now you know why they always come at the end, like rescuing everybody, because they're sort of like the emissaries of the Lord of the world, basically. So like they're sort of meant to help everybody. At the same time, it is a Deus Ex Machina.
And I think it makes more sense why they can talk if they are Maiar. So I prefer to think of it that way.
But even the little birds can talk, like in the Hobbit, like little sparrows and stuff. Are they Maya?
Yeah, but he also wrote The Hobbit basically as a children's book, and he had to edit a lot of it. So as far as I know, there really aren't many talking animals in Lord of the Rings. It's much more grounded in reality, and I think that was one thing that doesn't really
Reality?
You know what I mean? Tolkien reality.
Yeah.
But I found it interesting the way he ended this chapter. He talks about elves and men, about the gifts, and I wish this was in a chapter where the elves and men actually showed up, because it would have made a lot more sense.
I think it's actually very important to mention that the elves are immortal and that men are actually capable of dying of natural.
No, that's what they talk about. But basically, the elves are immortal; they don't die unless they waste in grief or they're slain in battle. But the men, it's a gift; it's not a punishment. It's a gift. The fact that they're not bound to the world; they go somewhere else that the elves don't know.
And the elves are basically there to make the world more beautiful, and that's it.
Sort of ornament, because they're all called. The fair, or the golden, or silver haired, or something like that. It's all shiny. It's
It's art. It's art, and Tolkien talks about that in the letter in the introduction about how art, is magic basically. Like that's what the elves do is they're making the world a more beautiful place, even though that sounds super corny. But that's what they're doing. But we can, I think we can move on to Chapter 2 of Aule and Yavanna. Shane, you want to do your recap for that one?
Yep, I'm ready. Aule, that's how you pronounce that?
Yes, sir.
I've said Aule. I know there's a umlaut in there, right?
I think it's actually when I listen to it in German, they say they pronounce it like really like Aule, like really really strong.
Well, we don't got to those dots in English, so we say American.
Yeah, they don't have the dots in the German.
Chapter 2. Aule makes the dwarves in secret. He desired the coming of the elves and men, and he wanted to teach his lore and craft. The form of elves and men was unclear to him, but he knew he had to make them strong because Melkor was showing his ass all over Middle-earth, and he didn't want them to get hurt. So he came up with the form that the dwarves are in. He knew the Valar wouldn't be down with the dwarves, so he made them in secret, and he made 7 fathers of the dwarves and hid them under mountains. Iluvatar, of course, knows what's up. And interestingly enough, he waits until Aule is done, and then he pops up and says, "What the fuck? Why are you doing this? You knew this was beyond your power to create real life." Said these are basically just puppets. And Aule kisses ass like a champ. He says he wanted to share the world that Iluvatar made and to love and teach. And he also turns it back on Iluvatar and basically says, "This is the way you made me. You know you made me this way. So really it's your fault." Aule offers to destroy the dwarves, and he moves to do so, but Iluvatar says no, and he forgives Aule and gives the dwarves true life. Iluvatar says he will not correct Aule's work, and he'll leave the dwarves as they are, and he will not allow them to go out into the world before the elves and men. So he puts the dwarves to sleep and says there will eventually be strife between his children of adoption and his children of choice. We're told here again how the dwarves are made strong to resist Melkor. They'll live longer than men. Elves believe they return to the earth and stone when they die, but page flip. Dwarves think that they go into halls of Mandos that are set apart for them, where they will eventually serve Aule and help him recreate the earth after the last battle, which that's something we can return to, this last battle. First I've heard of it. Curious if it comes up again. They also believe...
It's not important.
It's not.
They also believe that the 7 fathers will be reborn again and again. Aule goes home, tells Yavanna what went down. She says, "Oh, that's good." Oh, but because Aule didn't tell her what was going on, and he didn't fill her in until after the fact, the dwarves will not love the things she created, like the little animals and the trees, and they will only love the things that they make with their hands, like Aule, coincidentally, like their father. And they will cut down a lot of trees. Now, something we can come back to after I'm done reading here. Is this something she is declaring or something she's foreseeing? I don't know. I'm not sure, because it seems like it was something she's declaring. She's kind
I think she declares she foresaw it.
I think it's sort of like foresight, something. Even though Magnus is the official guy who for the future and the past and everything. What I find interesting though is that we see a lot of creatures that are linked to Aule in Tolkien's world, right? I mean, to a certain extent, Sauron, dwarves, and all that stuff. They're all very influential. But Aule himself is actually not that complex of a character, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, he never leaves his little workshop or whatever.
But we're about to get to the only funny part in the entire Silmarillion. So Shane,
I love it. Yeah.
I know. I was so pissed when Shane called
tell me you're going to quote it.
Oh no, I'm paraphrasing. Let's see. Aule says the elves and men will also consume resources like the dwarves, and that Yavanna's things are important, but elves and men will have dominion over them, though respectfully. Yeah, we'll see. Yavanna thinks about it, and so she goes to see Manwë and says, "So Aule said the elves and men are going to have dominion over my shit I've been working on all this time." Manwë says, yeah? Why? Yavanna says, "Well, that sucks. I'm busting my ass out here, making little trees and little animals and whatnot, and Melkor's tearing my shit up, and is everything I make going to be under the dominion of somebody else?" Manwë says, "Okay, if you could keep one thing, what would it be?" Ivana says, well, all my shit's pretty awesome, and everything contributes to the whole, making everything else more awesome. But the animals can kind of look after themselves, sort of, and the plants can't. And among the plants, the trees are the best, so I think the trees ought to be able to kick some ass and protect the other plants. Monway says, that shit is whack. Ivana says, yeah, well, in the beginning, while we were singing, you were singing about the clouds, I was singing about the trees. And in the song, that's what they did. The song is everything in your face. So Monway sat there looking annoyed, and he thinks back to the song, and then he suddenly remembers the part of the song Ivana's talking about that he
just wants her to
forgot.
leave him alone.
Then Monway said, whatever, I heard that part of the song. Anybody think I didn't hear it? Speak up now. Okay, that's what I thought. Well, behold, when the children awake, there will be Ents, and they will kick some ass occasionally.
When they can be roused to do so.
Well, not too hasty, right?
Not too hasty.
Exactly. And he says, Ivana, you remember that smart ass? I mean, when we were singing together and we made the eagles? Huh? You remember that? And Ivana was like, oh, right, the eagles. Now I remember. And they'll live in the trees. And Monway was like, what? Oh, no, sweetheart. They're going to live up in the mountains because that's the highest place on Middle Earth. Because that is, the only place good enough for them because they're my eagles. But the ants, they can live on the ground with your trees. So, Ivana, she strolls on home to tell Elul he's working as a smith. Doom, doom, doom. And she says, hey, you're dwarves, they better watch out because there's going to be ants and they're going to be protecting the trees. What do you think about that? And Elul looks up and says, dwarves still going to need wood. Doom, doom, doom. Back to the smithy.
Which is probably the most awkward ending of any chapter. He usually ends these chapters on these, these rousing, images and prose, and then it's literally they're gonna need wood. End of chapter.
Yeah.
This is actually a much lighter chapter, which I actually like because it's still at the moment. I mean, it's after everything has sort of been put into. I mean, there's been peace, sort of. So I guess this is sort of a moment of levity compared to what's to come. So I guess we should probably be thankful for this chapter.
I am,
because it's really. I mean, it shines a lot of light on what's been happening since Melkor got cast out, and also it gives an explanation reasonably as to where some creatures came from. So I'm actually really thankful for it. I don't know that the dwarves actually know of this story. We'll just have to imagine that they don't.
I feel like if they knew it, then they'd take more pride in it, because it's kind of weird that the whole the Valar are always waiting for the elves to show up and they're waiting for the children of Iluvatar, but then the dwarves are technically created first, and then the Ents are created then. So they're not first, and it kind of like messes with my head like, the whole time you're waiting for the elves, and then like, oh, the dwarves, it was like a mulligan, like he made it and then they went back. But
I think the dwarves would definitely throw this in the elves' faces if they knew
yeah,
about it.
right.
I just think they're so secretive they wouldn't tell anybody anyway.
But they don't go to Valinor so that they don't find out. They don't ever meet Aule. He's never there,
Yeah.
right? So they don't
I think-
except for Gimli. He'd be like, what the shit?
They never find out like exactly how they were created. I think that's also why they have like a different mythology than the elves and the men.
The elves are like, you turned to stone, dude. Like, no.
No.
I think this is also something that might be the cause of the rivalry between the dwarves and the elves, because basically they're not firstborn. So it's like, yeah, the elves are probably just saying that we are the children of Iluvatar. You go back to your place, right? And the dwarves are like, no, fuck you. We are sorry. We're not actually
Cool.
going to be pushed around by our status, right? We're also children of this world and so on, and so probably that's also partly why they are so antsy about the elves in general.
Yeah, well, we get all the strife in this chapter, basically. We know who's going to have trouble with who. The elves are going to have trouble with the dwarves and the men, and they're also going to work together at times, but they will be at odds also. And it all comes because Aule didn't tell his wife what he was doing.
I got two theories after reading this chapter. I think it's funny how the trees in Middle Earth can just sometimes come alive. Like Old Man Willow in the forest, and then other trees. I think Ivana, after all this went down, because she keeps going to Middle Earth and walking on Middle Earth, I think she starts giving the trees a little extra juice. Like, here's a little something, so they can kind of protect themselves a little bit at least. And the other theory I had was I read somewhere, I'm not sure if it was in one of these Silmarillion chapters or like Unfinished Tales, but Yavanna is the one that chooses the Maya that eventually becomes Radagast.
I think there was a chapter in Unfinished Tales about the Astari, right? I think that was from Unfinished Tales.
Okay. I'm thinking when they're picking the Maya to go to Middle-earth and fight the enemy, she's like, all right, Gandalf and Saruman, they can handle this. Radagast, you can. Like, yeah, you got to fight the enemy, but while you're down there, what you're really there is you're there to look after our shit, the stuff we've been working on, and that's why Radagast, he's just all about the little animals and the trees and stuff.
And those two blue wizards were like, F this, we're just going to keep walking.
Yeah.
They just keep going.
Yeah, I feel bad for them. They don't get mentioned at all, actually.
Oh, there was on the video game Shadow of Mordor.
Let's keep it canon, Shane. Let's keep it canon.
Hey, it's
But there's a cool reference. I haven't listened to the podcast still because I'm not finished with the game.
Yeah,
But there's in the appendices, one of the bad guys, they say a rumor is that he earned his position by handing Sauron the head of two blue wizards from the back.
Nice.
Making me angry.
What? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I love it. Okay,
Yeah, that's
I love it.
probably not canon, but we'll find with it.
It is now.
Anything to spice it up a little.
Yeah.
Does anybody think it would have been crazy fun, like if Christopher Tolkien left this chapter out and everybody didn't get this, like the origin of the dwarves or the Ents? Do you think people would have been pissed?
Yeah, I think if he concentrates so much on the elves, like people like Shellfish will probably say, "Well, that was a waste of space." It's like we didn't even get to see the dwarves or the Ents or whatever. It's just like this is actually a nice. I know this is sort of like the story of the elves and so on, but at the same time, like their actions affect everyone else. So if you don't set the stage for everyone else, I mean, there's not much investment that you can get from it, right?
Yeah, and this is one of the few areas where, I mean, we know that most of this was written by Tolkien at one point, but the final product we get, we don't really know what is originally Tolkien, and I accept it because if anyone had the right to do it, it was Christopher. But Tolkien was all about telling the Eld story and the history of the Eldar and their whole mythology. That I can completely see him like being, we need to tell the elves, the dwarves also, because they're a big part of what happens later. So if there's anything that, not that he made up, but he might have had to edit, I don't know, or add, but I can see that as something that he might have had to like throw in there to please the readers, because when people picked up this book in 1977, I'm sure they expected answers, and that was a big answer that they would have wanted to get.
It just, some of it doesn't necessarily feel like Tolkien writing, because it's not as like eloquent and beautifully written. That's why I kind of like feel like maybe there was some of it in like his notes and stuff, but Christopher Tolkien really had to just not make it up, but kind of throw this all together.
Right. I know we're all tiptoeing around. No one wants to say he made it up, but we know he must have made it. The whole process. He wrote 12 books on how it all came together, but maybe Guy Gavriel Kay, who actually was his like assistant through all this, in 30 years after everyone passes away, will be like, "Hey, this is how the Silmarillion actually came together, and I wrote it." But there were a couple biblical stuff. Matthew, you brought up about the comparisons with Abraham and Isaac, and that's definitely there. But one of my other things I picked up on was where Manwë goes into his like, "Hey, I remember" mode, and he says, "Do then any of the Valar suppose that I did not hear all the song, even the least sound of the least voice?" There's a Bible quote, Matthew 10:29, where "Yet not one sparrow falls to the ground without your father's knowing it," and that's a quote that's can take in either way, that God knows everything and He's responsible for everything, or He at least knows about everything and will help you through it. But I kind of thought that was another either, I don't know if he's making a direct comparison, but the idea that He knows everything that's going on, and you can't hide anything.
Can you?
Which
What's
sucks,
Melkor doing right now? I don't know.
Which sucks because he doesn't essentially tell them what's going to happen later, which is a bit, yeah.
Yeah, but from a composition perspective, like if Iluvatar wrote the music, then he's aware of all the voices. But if it's improvisation, then he doesn't know what all the Valar sung.
Can it be both though? It can't, right?
It's either one or the other.
Yeah, I know, and that's the
It can't
constant
be
problem
both.
we keep coming back to.
As far as the text is concerned, we don't have any confirmation, so it's probably best. I mean, I like a bit of ambiguity about these kind of things because we have a good discussion about it.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that the dwarves, they're like, "Hey, yeah, we go to the halls of Mandos, but we're separate. We've got separate halls over there." I like that. They have that animosity towards the elves so much that they don't want to hang out with them in the afterlife.
Oh, and I just wanted to like concrete point it out because we talked about it in the Shadow of Mordor podcast, but the dwarves can't be corrupted by the rings like men can, because their bodies won't turn to wraith. Like that can't happen to them because that's how Allay built them. Because they were asking about it on the other podcast.
Nice.
I mean, they can become corrupted like mentally, but they can't turn into a wraith. He can't take over their souls or anything like that.
There's no
Allay built them to resist.
Nazgul version of dwarves anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, which is weird because hobbits can apparently, after they get wounded by a Morgul blade, they can sort of turn slightly.
Yeah,
Well, at least that's what the film implies, right? I mean, I don't know. And it's a bit weird that the dwarves would be so singular, but at the same time, it's also interesting, I think. It's kind of nice to know that creatures that are sort of created by Aule cannot be corrupted by Sauron, who is a disciple of Aule. So it's really actually quite ironic.
I like that they're singular because they are singular. They're the only ones not created by Iluvatar. So it's interesting that they're just like, yeah, that doesn't affect us. It affects you bitches because Iluvatar didn't see it coming.
All right, so I've got chapter 3, which is of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor. And this is one of the longer chapters, and I just got it down to about 3 paragraphs, so a lot of stuff happens, but we'll get through it.
You got the best one.
I let everyone pick. Everyone went for the funny parts and for all the elves and all the names, but I like this one. Okay, so Melkor builds his stronghold named Autumno in the far north of Middle-earth. He then builds another fortress to the south of it and names that Angband. He gathers all his forces of demons and monsters to him, as well as several spirits of fire, which are called Balrogs. He takes up command in Autumno and gives command of Angband to Sauron, his captain. The Valar know that the time for the coming of the children is almost at hand. Varda creates bright new constellations of the stars so the children may have light. The children finally awaken by the shores of Cuivienen, which is also one of my favorite names in this whole book. It flows off the tongue like no other name, but that's his name. Which lies near the inland sea of Helkar. They name themselves the Quendi, which signifies those who speak. Orome finds the children on one of his hunts. The elves are in awe of Orome. Some are freaked out and run away. Some of them are eventually captured by Melkor and corrupted and turned into orcs. Orome then returns to Valinor, and the Valar decide to get rid of Melkor, to rid Middle-earth of Melkor before he can destroy the children of Iluvatar or corrupt them. The Valar then march in force out of Aman into Middle-earth, and a great battle is fought in the northwest of Middle-earth. The landscape again is changed and damaged in the fighting. Melkor eventually retreats to his fortress of Autumno. The Valar place a magic dome of protection over the elves at Cuivienen, so they can just hang out and not worry about what's going on in the north, and they lay siege to Autumno. The Valar are eventually victorious, and Tulkas wrestles Melkor to the ground because that's what he does. Melkor is bound and chained and brought back to Valinor. The Valar did not find and destroy all of his servants, and Sauron, as well as many of the Balrogs and lesser captains, escape the Valar's wrath. This time, Melkor is sentenced to be imprisoned in Mandos for 3 ages of the world. We don't really know how long this time is, but it's a very long time. Orome returns to the elves of Cuivienen and takes 3 ambassadors back to Valinor to see how awesome it is. He takes 1 ambassador from each of the elven groups, Ingwe of the Vanyar, Finwë of the Noldor, and Elwë of the Teleri. They go to Valinor, see the trees, and they just plain fall in love with the place. They then return to Cuivienen and try to convince all the elves to move to Valinor permanently. Most of them agree to go west, but some stay behind and become the Avari, and this is the first sundering of the elves. Ingwe leads the Vanyar, Finwë leads the Noldor. Elwë and Olwë, since there's so many Teleri, they need to be led by 2 captains, so Elwë and his brother Olwë lead them. Some of the elves were scared along the way, and they turned back or were left behind. The Vanyar eventually and the Noldor reach the western shores of Beleriand, and they're kind of freaked out by the sea. The Teleri are still hanging out. They're taking the long way, looking at every single thing along the way. And Orome goes back to Valinor to try to figure out the best way to bring the elves to Valinor safely.
I like that Ulmo blows his little roofie horn, and then they all decide they want to go over.
Yeah, so, I mean, maybe it's different when you're immortal, but, like, does anyone feel like someone should have been like, come on, get the fuck up, Teleri, come on. Like, where are you?
The Teleri are the worst. I mean,
they had to move a freaking island to get them across the sea.
Yeah, that's sort of like they're special. They're the prize collection. You have to make sure that you don't step on them by accident, right? So be sure you don't wake them up. Let them sleep for a couple of hours.
For a couple centuries.
Yeah.
I was going to say what I found striking is that they seem so childlike, and we're used to elves being so sophisticated and old,
Worldly.
I guess is one. Yeah, but I mean, it's the beginning of the world. But
Well, they're like toddlers pointing at something like, what's that? What's that? What's
Yeah.
that? Because they're brand new.
Let's give it 3 names.
Yeah, and let's give 5 names to everything.
Yeah. I'm also kind of surprised that you said some of the elves were left behind. Like, is there sort of policy? Isn't there kind of a no elf left behind policy? Or something? I don't know. It's really no. It's interesting because would the elves leave their companions behind, or is it that they don't have that much attachment to them?
Well, he makes the big deal of calling it the first sundering of the elves, and that this was a serious thing. It's not just, hey, I mean, these people were created together, they awoke to being together, and to leave some of them behind forever, as far as they know, is a big deal. But they also have this entire world to themselves, and they're going to, go forth and prosper and make it their own. But it's a tough decision. I honestly don't know. Like, would you want to go out and hang out with the gods, or would you want to kind of make your own way and see what happens? It actually is a serious decision. And it seems like the one that stay behind because they're freaked out by Arame and his flaming horse. Melkor freaked them out a little bit, but they were actually scared of the Valar that came to protect them.
At least they made the decision to stay, whereas some of the Teleri just ended up not going to Valinor because they got distracted or something.
Yeah, they didn't hear the call. They probably just were like sleeping too much. I don't know. It's sort of implied that it's a big deal in at least a lot of the rings, right? That when Arwen makes the choice, at least in the appendices, right? It's a bit. I think that this is here. It's a bit underplayed because there's so many of them, so you don't get the sense of this is a really big choice, because the Teleri later on, as we'll see, they make the decision. Oh yeah, we actually do want to join them, but not really. But maybe we do, and I don't know. It's so complicated for them.
And we also get a little bit more of the world being grounded in reality, because when they name the constellations, they actually respond to actual constellations. Like the sickle of the Valar is the Big Dipper. They mention Wilwerin, and if you go to the appendices, like, they actually tell you that Wilwerin is Cassiopeia, Menel Markar is Orion. And I thought that was just really, it's something that's subtle, but it's there. And if you're like, oh yeah, that's the 7 sickle, that could be the Big Dipper, which I thought was pretty cool.
Can we talk about the orcs?
Orc talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I think this is actually really interesting, because at least originally it seems that orcs were meant to be corrupted elves, right? And then later, I mean, at least that's what I read in expanded material, like in the other Book of Lost Tales, etc. It seems to be that the author wasn't sure exactly how the origin of the orcs was going to work out. So it seems that at least at the beginning they were elves, but later on Melkor might have used men to make orcs as well.
Right, but it's dangerous when we start quoting from the Books of Lost Tales, because those actually show the evolution of this was going to be this, and then this was going to be this, and it's tough to say at what point it became canon. That's why it's really very gray area. But I think we're meant to believe that eventually he crossed men with elves and orcs, and that's what made like the Uruk-hai. That's why they're like stronger and like super orcs, and the original orcs were just taken just from the elves. It basically just shows that Melkor can't create anything on his own that's intelligent. It's all, he has to mar and he has to corrupt stuff that's already created, which is one of his like always complaining points. Like, man, I can't do anything myself. I've got to fuck up someone else's shit. So.
I feel sorry for these elves in this. It's like they're like children. Like, some of them will get scared, by seeing the gods walking by, and they'll run into the trees, and then Melkor snatch them up and go and torture them and turn them into orcs. That's kind of sucky.
But they still stayed.
That elves are children until they're 50, and they get they hit puberty once they're 50 until they're 100, and by 100 they're actually real adults, to be honest.
Where do we get that from? I missed that.
Yeah, I was just saying.
I looked it up. I looked it up on the Wikipedia page.
Okay, we gotta be sure of where that's coming from, because I know there's a lot of elf speculation out there.
But at least, okay, then let's say that this is speculative. But at the same time, if that's true, then probably they were not. They don't know what's actually happening, right?
But these elves, I assume they didn't wake up as babies crawling on the shore. Like, they woke up as fully formed beings.
Probably that's why.
Because if there's elf babies, that's the cutest thing ever. But it's also, they'd all die.
well, if you
that's probably why they had to sleep. Actually, they probably had to sleep because it's like strawberries, right? They sort of grow underneath the earth when they're sleeping.
If you listen
So-
to the
An
Lord of the
elf
Rings
to strawberry
podcast,
Elves are
recipe?
strawberries theory. Here we go.
in the Lord of the Rings podcast, we decided that they laid eggs and then they grew in the ground until they were full-grown adults and then they hatched. That's what happens.
Actually, I have a dictionary that says that actually orcs multiply by probably laying eggs, but we're not. But they even in that dictionary they say they're not sure. So it's like it's not clear, but it's probably that they laid eggs. So I don't know. It seems like that would be something that fits with orcs.
Well, we
much
can't get
more.
bogged down in the science, because anytime Tolkien gets bogged down in science, even
Yeah.
like when they're talking about how long the days are and like the 14 hours, like that's kind of weird. Like, I don't want to know that they're because that makes them reptiles.
It speaks also to the complaint that people have against Tolkien that he's basically making them others, like that they are not relatable in any way. It's much easier to hate them if you don't give them any sort of like.
Of course. And but that's one of my favorite parts of Lord of the Rings is when Sam is hearing the two orcs just have like a regular conversation. You're like, oh, they're actually kind of people too, you know. And that
Oh
kind of
yeah, they just
Yeah.
wanted to get a little farm
Yeah, a
together
little
after
farm.
the war and grow some.
But
crops
you're not
right
supposed
away.
to think that, because basically they kill every single orc and goblin they come across. And don't get me started on goblins. Where do they come from? Are they orcs?
I like to think that they're different. That they're different kind of orcs, basically. But yeah, they don't go back. I mean, I guess all
They
of
got
them.
less sunlight, I think.
Yeah.
This is I did the same thing with the dwarves, how we got a concrete or at least a semi-concrete answer as to where they came from. We do have an answer to where the question, where do the orcs come from? But also we find out the Elves Awake by Cuivienen on the inland sea of Helkar. There's a whole debate apparently among Tolkien fans of where this actually is. And when I first read this, since there's no maps in the books that include Helkar, I try to do extrapolate, and I feel like it has to be basically what becomes Mordor later on, because that whole area we know that Mordor at one point was like a sea, and I think that this is like the eastern shore of Mordor is where it might have been Helkar at some point, and we know the land's been changed in the 20,000 years since then. But did anyone think like, did you want to find this on a map, or is it just another name they threw out there that like it's just a name and a location that we don't find?
No, I think it's a very important name. It's just that I have an atlas at home. It's Karen Wynn Fonstad's Middle Earth Atlas.
Yeah,
don't
I
know
have that in
if-
front of me right now.
Yeah. So it's not in that one.
No,
But at the
it is
same
in that
time-
one, but this isn't. This is her
No, it's not
interpretation.
canon. Yeah.
She has it there.
I just assumed because they said the world has changed so much that it's kind of you wouldn't be able to find it, or if you did, it would be pointless because it's not even the same place anymore.
Yeah, I agree with Shane. I think it's probably like under the water, or else it would be like revered by the elves, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but if it's Mordor, then it's kind of interesting that what eventually became the center of evil and destruction is where the elves came from, because that might go with Tolkien's whole theme of like, yeah, there's good, but there's also bad, and whenever there's something good, there's something bad with it also.
I did. That is interesting, but I kind of pictured it being even farther off to the east. Like,
Well, it's got to be
where-
far away because they take a while just to get to the Misty Mountains, and that's not even the halfway point when they're on their way back.
Yeah.
But we don't have to get bogged down in the details, but it is fun sometimes.
That's what we're doing, man.
I know. It is a great companion to the Silmarillion, is The Atlases of Middle-earth by Karen Wynn Fonstad. If you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. It's a cool book. I believe, Alix, you're going to do number 4?
Yes. Okay. So, chapter 4 is of Thingol and Melian. Melian is a Maya who came to Middle-earth when the elves were created, and she is the wisest and the best singer of the people of Lorien. She has a lot of nightingale buddies who like to hang out and sing with her. Elwë, who later becomes known as Thingol, is the lord of the Teleri, who was in East Beleriand when his people were on their way to Valinor. One time, I was going to say one day, but since there's no sun and moon, I don't really think there's days. So one time, he was on his way through the woods of Nan Elmuth to visit his friend Fenway up in Noldor, when he suddenly became enchanted by the voice of Melian, who was having choir practice with her nightingale buddies. Elwë completely ditches Fenway and forgets what he was in the woods in for the first place, and follows the voice. He comes upon Melian in a clearing with the light of Aman in her face. Neither of them speak, they just hold hands and stand there for a couple hundred years. And most of Elwë's people just end up leaving Middle-earth without him, while he stayed there with Melian, later to become a king of the Grey Elves, the Sindar, those who stayed behind to stay with him. And he was then named Ilu Thingol, which means King Greymantle in Sindarin. Together, Thingol and Melian have a daughter who is the fairest of all the children of Iluvatar that was or shall be.
So that's the whole chapter? That's
the whole chapter.
Yeah, this is the shortest chapter in the book.
I think this is not a spoiler. We will probably see more of them. These are Mayas, are basically, I don't know, they're sort of the equivalent of angels or demigods.
Well, Melian is, but not Thingol.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's probably sort of the idea behind it is they are both immortal, but in a different way. Different beings coming together and then have a child, which is probably the most talked about child.
Basically, everything that comes later, it's because of these. Everything in Lord of the Rings is all wrapped up in this family tree that begins with Elu, Thingol, and Melian.
Everything that Aragorn sort of mopes about and Arwen mopes about comes from this.
Yes, there is plenty of moping, but I do like you brought. It's all very chaste, and it's almost like Arthurian. This meeting in the woods with the birds singing. It's very. Tolkien never writes sex, but this is the closest he comes to it, I guess. Is just like this meeting of holding hands and gazing at each other under the stars, and everybody else just moves along.
They mingled their little avatar tales.
Right.
As long as it's not Lysa screaming Pete, I'm making a baby. I hope it's at least we're spared that kind of detail.
I think it's kind of interesting that we found out that the wizards, the Ishtari, are not unique in that Maya taking a physical form, staying on Middle Earth for a significant amount of time.
Right. She was.
I imagine it's a different process maybe or whatever, but.
It's also weird. I mean, because the children. I mean, I suppose Melian took her form before the children actually awoke, right? It seems weird that she would know what they would look like, or at least because she resembles a humanoid person. I mean, how would she know before they awoke? I mean, she doesn't have anything to mold her physical form after. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but maybe she can change her form. Once she saw elves, maybe she made a few adjustments.
Yeah.
I could be the prettiest one of those. Watch this.
Yeah.
Their meeting was just all a bet. Melian's like, I bet you I can get their king to fall in love with me. They're like, nah, you fucking can't. She's like, watch me.
Oh my god.
It's the biggest Valar running joke.
Maybe the Maya just look like what you think. Maybe you see a reflection of yourself or a reflection of your own, what you think a being should look like.
Yeah, I mean,
so that elves would see elves or men could see men.
Maybe Iluvatar gave them all the same idea of what
they're all made in
a
Iluvatar's
person
image,
looks
right?
like. Yeah.
Except for the dwarves. Those stupid bastards.
But they were made off what Aule, kind of the impression he had of what the elves and men were going to look like.
Yeah.
It wasn't fully formed in his mind.
They're like humanoid.
Yeah.
We shouldn't say humanoid because there's no humans. They're elvenoids.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Elfenoids.
It's like they got 2 arms and 2 legs, and they poop out their butts, and this is what they look like. And they have beard.
And they all have beard.
Eldar don't poop.
Got 50 eyes or something.
No, but they knew we were going to. It was in the music.
Right. Oh, right. I forgot that part.
Everybody poops. It's right in the music.
And it will eventually become a best-selling children's book.
So it's here, mine is chapter 5 of Eldamar and the Princess of Eldalie. Yeah, so the Vanya and the Noldor, they arrive at the western coast of Middle-earth, but there's a strait that separates Aman from Middle-earth, which is made of ice. The elves, they come over the Sirian stream, they see the sea for the first time, and so they have this longing, which I made a note is something that is mentioned again in Return of the King, because Legolas is actually longing for the sea.
To the sea, to the sea. Oh,
yeah. So Ulmo greets them there. He takes literally an island that's far off, and he sort of makes a ship out of it, a ferry. He uses it to bring them over. The Vanya and the Noldor, they cross the sea on the island, and they arrive in Aman. It's said that the eastern part of the island is rumored to be the island Balar, and Osse, who is a Maya, often visits it. And so the Teleri, they remain in East Beleriand because they heard the call too late. Then they hear that Finwë and Ingwe had left as well. The Teleri, they go to the sea. They make Olwe their king. Osse teaches them in music and knowledge of the sea. The Teleri, they love the sea, and they are considered the best singers among the Sindar, which is a neat detail. And so the Noldor and the Vanya ask Ulmo to take the Teleri across. Osse is sad because he wanted their singing to be heard in the lands that he protected. And so he's like, why do I have to, he's convinced some of the Teleri to stay, and they become the Falathrim.
Yeah, you guys, you don't need to go to heaven. Just stay here.
Yeah, you're fine where you are. Just stay with me. I don't want to be alone. And so they were the first sailors and the first to make ships. It's important to note that Círdan was their lord, so he's been around until the very end, right? From the very beginning. So Olwe wanted to go to Valinor, and the majority of the Teleri left as well. So the friends of Elwis and Gollo that remained called themselves Eglath, which is the Forsaken people. And they preferred to live in the woods and Forsaken hills rather than near the sea because it causes them sadness. I don't know how that look on an elf's face, actually, sadness. It's like, yeah. They always seem so ethereal. So the island of the Teleri, so therefore becomes Tol Eressëa, which is a lonely island. And so you can still see Aman from it, but you're not necessarily in it. So it's like in between, right? And it led to differences in languages between the Teleri and the Vanya, and the Noldor, which I find interesting. Now come the family trees, which are, very, very important. So there's Finwë, he is the king, and he was married to Miriel. She had Fëanor, and then he also later married Indis, who of the Vanya, and he had Fingolfin and Finarfin.
For the sake of brevity, I have moved the rest of Matthew's wonderful recap in regards to the family trees of the Eldar and Valinor to the aftershow. Matthew did a very informative and comprehensive recap, but as this chapter is so much of an info dump already, I have chosen to build it a little island and ferry it to the back of this episode. But just like Ulmo, I left a little bit of it anchored here so you at least know what is going on, and who the first generation of elves born in Valinor are. Sorry for the interruption.
Teleri lived long on Tol Eressëa, and Ulmo sends Osse, who's actually sad to teach them how to build ships. The Teleri, they prefer the coast, and the Noldor give them great gems, and that's the funny bit, and diamonds. And so basically they either disperse it on the beach or they throw them in lakes. Like, it's like, yeah, we give you this present, like, yay. Yeah, so the Teleri, their ships resemble swans, and they are in the havens of Alqualonde, which is like Always House, right? And over time, the Vanya began to love the light of the trees more and more, and so they left Tirion, separated themselves from the Noldor, and so the Noldor remembered Middle Earth, and they remained in Calaquendi, which is the path of light, or the hills of the valleys that are not far from the sea. Finwë was therefore king in Tirion, and Olgo was king in Alqualonde. But the High King of the Elves was Ingwe, who lived on the Taniquetil at Manwithfeet. It's like, this is like the big beauty contest where everyone sort of comes on stage and you see like every different individual who's going to become important later on.
I mean, these early chapters, there is an info dump, and it's tough to keep all these characters together sometimes, but it's good to know. Finway's the main guy. He's got 3 sons, and that family is basically where all the trouble comes from.
Yeah, I like the idea of sort of like taking an island and making it a ferry. But it's
weird like, though that they stop like no we don't want to go all the way, we want to almost get there and then live on the island. It's like taking the Titanic to New York and then sinking it in New York Harbor and never getting off the Titanic.
They want to have their cake and eat it too, right? So they want to see it, but they don't want to necessarily go there. They're constantly in between both of these options. I mean, they sort of like from one day to the next, they're sort of like, oh, I want to go. Maybe not. It's like that's probably
that's so Teleri of them to do that.
Yeah, that's probably what Shellfish hates about them. It's like, they're so like they have so, I wouldn't call it insignificant, but they have really small problems at this point.
Yeah, I found it weird that instead of like teaching the Teleri how to build ships, they just moved an island 2 or 3 times, and then decided they weren't going to move the island anymore and teach them how to make ships.
And when they made the ships, they apparently didn't teach them how to make masts or sails, because then they had a bunch of birds pull the ships the rest of the way.
It's like, we will just give you the minimum necessary because we don't want to inconvenience you too much or something. It's like, we don't want to take away your time. Just frolic around and sing and all that stuff.
Yeah, we also know that a lot of time is going by. That it seems like this is happening all at once, but if that happens, then it means that maybe not an age, but a long amount of time is going by that all this is happening. And I also like that it's the fact that you're building a society here. It's not just like we're all hanging out here, everything's great. Like, you've got different people doing different things, and Finway's kids are running off, trying to explore, and Ingway's, they're just happy to hang out at the feet of God, basically. But and I've always liked the Teleri when they get to Ammon and when they build their city of Aqualande. Yeah, like, they're gonna have a navy and they're gonna go explore. It just adds depth to the society and to the land that they're all living in.
What I find interesting is that we get sort of name dropping here and there, right? We get Galadriel, we get Círdan, we get Celebrimbor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we get three of the of the big people. Especially they're all ring bearers, right? I think Celebrimbor, wasn't he? He made
them. So
he made the rings.
I'm sure he wore them at one point.
They're around since the very beginning, and it seems like they also all come from the same family. So like all the troubles right through the Third Age, sort of linked to the House of Fëanor and Finway, to be honest.
They say at a couple points that he does this weird thing where they say it's almost like a little what if scenario where, like, some people say it would have been better if Finway never remarried and had all those other kids because none of this trouble would have happened. But at the same time,
but that's not his fault, right?
No, but it's an interesting narrative style that he mentions this, and then but then he kind of caps it by saying, but then all these other awesome people wouldn't have lived anyway. It's a really weird writing style. I love the book and I love everything that happens, but some points I have to like take a step back and be like, this doesn't make great narrative sense to throw this stuff in here. Not that we're writing, critically, making fun of it for doing it, but
I mean, I'm, at least on the forums, I've sort of sometimes complained about the prose in A Song of Ice and Fire being a bit too, descriptive, and it's not really my thing. I mainly read the story because I find the characters really compelling. But here, it's definitely like this is a completely different level of stiff, right? It's I don't know. It's not engaging, and I can see why many people once they wanted to read the book were disappointed because it just wasn't a real story. It's more like a chronicle of the history of what happened.
Yeah, but in a historical account, you wouldn't tease things that are coming later, generally speaking.
No, that's true. As we said, probably it's also because parts of it were not written by Tolkien himself, and they're based on notes. Christopher Tolkien had to sort of edit things down and change things around, and just because he's related to Tolkien doesn't mean he has the same writing skills as well, right?
There's times that I wish that because we know he submitted a manuscript for the Silmarillion back before The Lord of the Rings was published. I wish I could just read that, even though it'd be an earlier version of it, but at least it would be 100% what he
complete.
What he thought, even if names were changed. Like Melkor used to be Melko, and like all the names got changed, but that's kind of what I wish I had. So we're going to get to our last chapter tonight, chapter 6, which Matt will be doing the recap for.
All right, so everything is like really awesome in Valinor right now, and the Noldor are happy, and they don't see an end to the work that they can do, and they're just having a time of their life. So Finway weds this girl Miriel, and they get it on, and she gives birth to Fëanor. And being an overachiever, she gives all of her like spirit fire to him. So she's basically like running on fumes and goes to Lorien and just kind of passes away there. And eventually Finway, he keeps on like calling her by all her names, which I'm sure, Miriel wasn't the only one. But then finally just stops going to Lorien. So Fëanor is like really subtle in mind and in his works that he does, and he learned a lot from Matan, who is his father-in-law, and so he just kind of develops his skills more and more and more. So let's see, they have the 7 sons, which we already went over. And all of them are kind of hot-headed too, because apparently she gave, like, the wife of Fëanor could tame Fëanor, but eventually that just didn't work out, and she gave only some of her qualities to each of her sons, but not one of them was exactly like her. So they're all kind of hotheads. So Finway's like, whatever, I'm still young. I'm only like 2,000. I'm going to remarry.
They're also redheads, right? I mean,
Right.
Might at least has red hair. I guess three of her children have red hair, I think.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
They were all golden-haired beauties.
Well, I know Feanor, wasn't he dark-haired? So
Yeah, black hair.
That's right.
Yeah.
I apologize.
So, okay, so yeah, Finway wants to remarry, and so he remarries this other Vanyar, and Feanor's like, well, that fucking sucks, because both of my stepbrothers, like, are douches, so I'm just gonna work, like, by myself, like, out in wherever he is, like, in his own mansion workshop. So he does that. So now the 9,000-year imprisonment of Melkor is up. So, I mean, I'm guessing 3,000 years in age, and it is for 3 ages. So they bring him to Valmar, and there he, like, sues for pardon. And, you know, I think it was Olmo was not deceived, and Tulkas clenched his hands whenever he saw Melkor go by. Because Manwë, in all his infinite wisdom, pardons Melkor because he's like, I don't even understand evil. So, you know. So then Melkor, like, tries to behave himself, but really in his heart is like, he's like, God damn it, you guys have it all together and I don't have anything. So he just starts being like a little like Mean Girls gossip queen and starts spreading all these like rumors around the Noldor, and which will eventually lead to them creating weapons instead of just like gems and beautiful things. And yeah, it just kind of ends with you know, no one ever hated Melkor more than Feanor, even though they're both like, Melkor will say like, oh no, I taught Feanor everything he knows, and Feanor's like, that's bullshit, you know, you got nothing. So, and he's the first one that will call him Morgoth. And as far as the summary, I mean, it's only like a 6-page chapter, maybe, not even. So that's a summary.
Does anybody else think it's strange that Nienna, like, was one of the people championing Melkor to let him out?
Well, it makes sense because she's at least the closest. I mean, like, her specialty is sorrow, and he's created a crap ton of sorrow, so she at least would know that.
It was a
job
job
security.
decision.
Yeah.
She's like, guys, I got nothing to do since he's been gone.
Yeah,
Can we
she's
let him
running
go?
out of things to be sorrowful for.
Yeah, it makes sense. But I like how Tulkas is like, I'm having none of it. No way. I just want to wrestle this guy, and he cannot wait to wrestle him again.
Because I've punched him so many times in his face, I know what he's like, so, you know.
Yeah, but actually, an interesting thing about Tulkas is he didn't fight Melkor at all. He just clenched his fist because it was the judgment of Manwë, and they can't rebel against it because it'd be doing the same thing as Melkor did.
Right.
I liked how they said, didn't they say that Feanor, he did learn from Melkor, but, I mean, you know, they both talk shit after the fact, but they said that all of his mistakes, quote unquote, he was never fooled at all by Melkor. Even though he eventually does a lot of evil, or a lot of evil becomes from his actions. I don't know, because I haven't read ahead and I never read it, but I know he's responsible for a lot of harm, but it's basically all him, you know. I thought that was interesting that, you know, it wasn't really the trickery of Melkor that is, you know, a result of Feanor.
Well, it says that Melkor indeed declared afterwards that Feanor had learned much art from him in secret, and had been instructed by him in the greatest of all his works. But he lied in his lust and his envy, for none of the Eldalie ever hated Melkor more than Feanor, who named him Morgoth. So yeah, so he like talked it up, but he was all talking. It was all air.
Bluster.
Words are wind.
Yeah, it's all self-aggrandizement, right? So, yeah.
Did they mention the creating of weapons in this chapter? I know you talked about it, but I didn't think they did yet.
No, not yet.
No, but they just start talking about like the whispers that Melkor is doing that creates that like unrest, and probably obviously does influence Feanor. I mean, he's kind of a dick anyway, but like it's kind of like feeding his like internal fire.
Yeah, because I just feel like the Valar would have been like, hey, Feanor, what the fuck you need a sword for, dude? There's nothing here to hurt you.
Yeah, as of now, Feanor hasn't really done anything to make us take a step back, but we get to the point later where it's like, are we supposed to like this guy? Because he's not a knight. He doesn't do anything particularly likable. But
Which,
it's
to me,
good to have someone to root for, but it's tough to, like, I like the elves that kind of stay behind this one, because they're like, yeah, we're not following you because you're crazy.
Yeah.
But at the same
I'm not
time,
crazy.
it's
I'll
like,
kill you.
but it's at the same time, it's still understandable why he does what he does later on. I think.
Oh no, I understand everything he does. I never don't understand it, but I rarely agreed with it.
Which is why I'm always when people tell me like it's a version of fantasy tropes, right? This is it, right? Basically, because throughout the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, you've been told like the elves, they're so nice, they're so friendly, and now you sort of see that they're individuals. They are sort of at least partially also victim to the normal tempest that and then, that's why I mean that's why it's probably very difficult to reconcile the two. All the elves in Lord of the Rings are sort of like they're very laid back and all that stuff. So yeah, but that's probably because they've been through a lot of stuff by that time. So I don't know.
Right. They have some experience.
Yeah. It's like they had to calm down after a millennia of fighting. So it's okay. Let's just enjoy life.
And they can't even do that because Sauron's back. Did anyone have anything else overall, just for like the arc of the story as to where it's going, or just any last comments about anything that was brought up?
I think this is rising tension. As at this point, this is sort of like we know what Malcolm is thinking. Now you sort of know where things are probably going to go. At least because he's in Aman. It's actually much more dangerous than it was before. We at least know from his thoughts that he's envious and all that stuff.
But none of that is outward, though. It's all inner monologue.
No, that's what I mean. But as a reader, we probably can guess what. I mean, if we are not already familiar with the story, we can sort of guess where it's headed.
I don't know. Can we, Shane?
We definitely know Fëanor is going to cause some shit, basically.
Also, a big giveaway is when they say, like, noontime. It was the noontime in Valinor. It's like, oh, crap.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's about to get dark.
Still better than Twilight, right?
Right. Well, they mentioned a couple times of this, like, I think it's Fëanor. No, Finway's wife says, like, don't blame me for all this stuff that's going to happen. Like, there's this sense of building doom. They call it doom it a couple times. I am blameless in what Fëanor is going to do because it's all him, not me. But just the fact that he like drains her life force through the birth is kind of just, that's one of the first red flags.
Right.
And she's like, I can't do it. I'm going to die on an island. I can't do that again.
And that's one of those things that how they say the elves dwindle and they don't like procreate very quickly, but maybe it is because they lose life force to like create a new life. They actually lose a piece of themselves into them. So maybe that's why elves dwindle, because you can't give them everything you have.
I think in Lord of the Rings or whatever, they're like, we'll diminish it into like a rustic folk of the dell or something like that. So like, kind of like elves as like, you kind of find like an Irish,
Fairies
stories. Yeah, fairy stuff rather than.
Well, Dwindle is a really cool elf name, like Dwindle the Elf.
Yeah. It's like Shorty the Hobbit or something.
Fatty.
So yeah, stuff is going down. The stage is set for what's coming next. I think that wraps up number 2. Sorry if it was a little specific at some point, but it's really tough to make some of this what happens in this book seem interesting, because it really is a lot of info dump. I mean, once Fëanor's story kind of takes off, then it's a much more this happened, then this happened, and it's you're caught up in it. But there's just so much backstory that needs to be there, and that's also one of the drawbacks. Well, like you said, a lot of people can't get into it because it's the story really it's not much plot. It's a lot of backstory. At least
until this point.
Right.
I think that later on it's just going to, the pace is going to pick up. But at the same time, this is sort of a story that takes more than one lifetime, basically. It's a sort of like it spans different. I mean, it's a long time, basically, because, Melko is immortal. And so it's like, you're fighting against an enemy he's really old and he's actually damn formidable. I think this sort of makes sense. It's sort of putting the context. It's at least epic in the sense like I don't think that people read Beowulf because they are interested in the plot. They're interested in it because it's epic. It's an epic poem. Mm-hmm. So it's like this is sort of the same. I mean, it's sort of a similar. You see the scale of what's at stake before it actually goes into fight round 1, something like that.
Right. But it will, and that's coming up in the near future. So thanks everyone for joining us for round number 2. And if you have any questions about stuff we've covered or stuff that's coming up in the upcoming chapters, you can post that in the forum thread, and we'll get to that.
I'm sure there won't be anything. I think we did a great job, but They'll know all the names.
Well, I was thinking putting up an actual quiz or like something they could take, like, because I feel like we've given people so much information. But I was going to read a token quiz, but I'm quite exhausted at this point.
Yeah, I think that would be.
I guess we've been over 2 hours, I guess now.
All right, thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Dwarf's still gonna need wood. Don't.
And that's why, I mean, later we will see what the relationship between Fëanor and his half-brothers is, actually. And so Fëanor is the best with words and hands, so he's the big, the big cheese in creating stuff. Fingolfin is the strongest, most resistant, and the bravest. Finafin is the most beautiful and wise. So they also all have children, right? And so Fëanor, he has 7 sons, Maedhros, Maglor, he's a good singer. Killigorm the Fair, he likes hunting and is a friend to Orome, but he doesn't have we will see how his sense of justice develops later on. And then there's Caranthir, the Dark, because he's the harshest and quick to anger. Corofin, the Crafty, who is Fëanor's favorite, and he's actually father to Celebrimbor, who forged the Rings of Power. And then we have the last 2, which are Amrod and Amras, and they were twins and the youngest, and they would be great hunters. That's all we know for now. Fingolfin basically had also 3 children with Anaire, I think is she called. He had a daughter, Aridel, the White, who was pale. But I don't know if it's because she was pretty or because she was, just didn't go out in the sun much. But we don't know.
There was no sun yet.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, she was the long. But probably she slept too long. But and so she was actually strong and loved, and she liked to hunt, and she was often in company of Fëanor's sons, then her cousins. But she made it clear that she didn't want to be married to any one of them. So yeah, that's a bit weird, like incestual elves. So she's later the mother of Maeglin, and we'll see what he does, which is awkward as well. And so the last one of the 3 is Finafin, who was the most beautiful and wise of Finwë's children, obviously. But yeah, he married Eärwen, which is also like sometimes Tolkien just adds 1 letter to a name that already exists, so it's like Eärwen. Yeah.
Hey, as far as we know, this name came first, and he took a letter off it.
Oh, could be, yeah. But it's like she's the daughter of Olwe, and so their kids are Galadriel, Finrod, later called Felagund, so it's the Pure of Caves. Then we have Orodred, Angrod, and Aignon. And those are all very close friends to Fingolfin's son, and they're like brothers. That's at least what we know from this chapter.
Dwarf's still gonna need wood. Don't.
Welcome to the call, though, man.
Yeah,
thanks.
It's a podcast celebrity with us.
I'm actually not.
Celebrity.
I wouldn't say I was Steve. I wouldn't say that was Stephen Colbert, but Stephen Colbert will tell you the same thing anyway.
Right, exactly.
It's a very nice accent you have there.
Oh, do I actually? Oh, yeah, okay. I'm actually from Belgium, so that's why.
Bina's gonna be jealous. We got to talk to you first.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I tried to add her to my contact list, and she wasn't sure who it was at first because probably she hadn't checked my Skype username first, and so I suppose now it's cleared up. Now that I know how Skype works, I hope to be on many more VOKs in the future. Actually,
nice,
fantastic.
Dwarf's still gonna need wood. Don't.
Keep the Silmarillion discussion to an hour or so. I don't want it to go too much longer. But everybody's good to go.
Oh, man.
We can
got an hour worth right here. Sorry,
yeah,
guys.
I know.
Yeah, I got a couple of pages on my 2 pages chapter.
Yeah,
this is suck. It's like you're trying to whittle it down, but everything's so whittled down. It's like, well, okay.
Mine is about traveling actually, and it's like 3 pages of summaries already. It's just I don't know.
I might have to do some editing then.
No more hour.
Actually, the chapter is just 5 pages, and I have 3 pages of summary. Weird.
It's crazy.
That's all right. We'll get to it. No one's going to complain that we're talking too much about the Silmarillion, I don't think. I just know it's weird hours for some people, so I wouldn't want to keep people up more than they have to.
Yeah, I'm fine with this. I'm actually it's 4 a.m. here anyway, or 5 a.m. now. I think I can manage it.
Just to be sure, you're not. I won't call you German. You're Belgian. I don't want to.
I'm Belgian German actually.
Okay.
I used to live in Germany for 12 years, and then I moved to Belgium actually.
Okay. So I won't call you a kraut or anything at any point during the
Oh,
discussion.
no, that would probably
Oh wow.
just stir up some, I don't know, some
We won't mention the war. What war? No war. Won't mention the war.
Not yet, anyway.
Right. All right.
Definitely.
All right. So everyone's good to go.
Dwarf's still gonna need wood. Don't, don't.
I like the recaps just because if someone is listening and doesn't read the books, they can follow along and still enjoy it.
Absolutely. Otherwise, there's just going to be 6 people listening to this.
Right. Us. We're going to listen to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also adds a little, levity to it, which there's no levity in this in the Silmarillion at all.
Right.
Dwarf's still gonna need wood. Don't, don't.
But I did find
reference.
there is a very good Tolkien quiz book by Andrew Murray, and I found my notes that I'd written in it when I took this quiz on June 2nd, 2006, and I got 6.5 points out of the 10 questions. I missed a couple, but we'll ask them the next time.
Did you give yourself half a point?
Well, yeah, because some of the questions asked 2 questions, and I gave myself
gotcha.
half a point there. Where did Namo live, and what was his role? I got the first half. So.
Dwarf's still gonna need wood. Don't.
As I was making my notes, at the bottom of the doc, I just kept, anytime a new name for the elves came up, I put it there. I was like, okay, we got 4, they got 6, and we ended up, I believe, with 12 different groups of elves, and as far as I can tell, 6 of them are exactly the same, and it's weird, he picks and chooses when to call them the Quendi, or the Eldar, or the Avari, and like the Falmari, and the Falathrim seem to be pretty much exactly this, but depends on where they went, but...
Yeah, it's all about the events in their lives.
Exactly, and that makes sense from what you would call yourselves, but you'd think as a narrator he would tell you what they are.
Yeah, but at least for the moment, the elves are not they don't separate it by anything other than geographical location. We'll see that they will probably not. This will not probably stay just. It will not be limited just at that, right? They're going to split up into different groups based on completely different criteria. Based on completely different criteria, right? It's sort of maybe that's a bit of foreshadowing, so to say. Like, okay, these are. I mean, it's the Sun Ring of elves, right? So it's like they are part, but at least they're one common people. They are sort of like they feel like they are akin, and we'll see that might not necessarily last for forever.